If you work in quality control at a candy factory, you know strict safety regulations come with the job. It's why you partner with Grainger. Grainger helps you find the high-quality and compliant products your business needs to inspect, detect, and help correct issues. And the sweetest part is, everyone gets a product that's as safe to eat as it is delicious. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Before we begin, do you have a theory about this case or a story of your own? Share it with me at nightwatchfiles@gmail.com. Your insights might be featured in a future episode. In April 2015, just 2 days after their eldest daughter April's 3rd birthday, Victoria sat at the kitchen table, feeding her infant son, Ben. The quiet moment was interrupted by the sound of her husband rushing down the stairs in a flurry. "I'm late for work," he called out, appearing briefly in the doorway. "I've got to go, but I'll see you later." "Okay, see you tonight," she replied, watching as he disappeared out the front door. "Bye," he shouted, the door slamming shut behind him. Victoria turned back to Ben, speaking gently as he sat in his baby chair. "Looks like it's just the 3 of us today," she murmured. "We've got the whole day to ourselves before Daddy gets back." But he never came home. That evening, Victoria sat on the couch with April, watching cartoons, when a sudden knock at the door broke the quiet. With no choice but to leave Ben on his playmat, she made her way to the door, moving carefully, a crutch under each arm. When she opened it, 2 men stood on the doorstep. "Good evening, Mrs. Cilliers," one of them said. "I'm Detective Inspector Paul Franklin, Wiltshire Police." "Oh," Victoria paused, caught off guard. "May we come in?" he asked. She hesitated, glancing around at the messy house, a reflection of a long day caring for 2 small children while recovering in a spinal brace due to a nearly fatal skydiving accident caused by faulty equipment. Sure." She led them into the living room and eased herself onto the sofa, unease tightening in her chest. What could this be about? Her mind raced. Had something happened to her husband? It hit her. She hadn't heard from him all day since he left for work, and it was already past the time he should have been back home. As the detectives settled into their seats, a deep sense of dread took hold. Then D.I. Franklin spoke. "We're here this evening, Victoria, because your husband has been arrested." Her heart stopped. "What for?" "He's been arrested on suspicion of your attempted murder." Victoria was born in Edinburgh's Western General Hospital in 1975, experienced what she describes as a reassuringly normal childhood. Her mother was Scottish, and her father hailed from Devon. They met while students at Edinburgh University, where her mother studied nursing and her father pursued actuarial science. Their approach to parenting was warm yet disciplined. Victoria felt a close bond with both parents, perhaps leaning slightly towards being a daddy's girl, and cherished the happy life they created for her. Her mother dedicated herself to raising Victoria, while her father began his career as a programmer for Standard Life, eventually progressing to an information systems development manager. 4 years later, the family expanded with the arrival of her younger brother, Christopher, completing what she termed the perfect nuclear family, who shared dinner together every evening. Their home was in Haddington, a quiet town about 20 miles east of Edinburgh, where in the 1980s, children could safely play independently. Victoria's weekdays were filled with school and activities, while her weekends were largely devoted to horse riding, a passion so strong she imagined spending her entire life caring for horses. She characterized herself as a secure and well-balanced child who couldn't foresee any threats to her known world. However, her first experience of heartbreak arrived when she was 14 years old. Prior to this, there were subtle indications that something was amiss within the family, moments where Victoria sensed a hidden truth but chose to ignore her niggling feeling in an effort to preserve their little bubble of contentment. She preferred to assume everything was fine until explicitly told otherwise, a coping mechanism born from a fear of disrupting their happy family life. Eventually, one Saturday morning, her parents came into her room. Her father gently informed her that they needed to talk, his soft tone immediately causing Victoria's stomach to churn with apprehension, sensing unwelcome news. He began by explaining their hope that they wouldn't have to tell her yet, but that they believed it was time for her to know. Her mother had cancer. The news struck Victoria with immense force, a physical blow that brought on a dizzying sensation. It was far worse than any of her imagined possibilities, making her feel as though her world was about to collapse. Frozen and speechless, her mind raced, struggling to process the information. Her father continued, explaining that the prognosis was uncertain, but that her mother would receive treatment. Her mother chimed in with a quick smile, explaining it would be chemotherapy, with the hope of fighting off the cancer. Despite this direct information, Victoria's body went into shock, causing her to retreat emotionally, a pattern that would recur in the face of significant emotional challenges. Internally, the thought of her mother's illness was almost unbearable, raising numerous questions that she felt ill-equipped to even voice. Although deeply pained, Victoria consciously tried to remain calm, believing that her distress would only worsen her mother's situation. Her younger brother, Christopher, being only 10, did not fully grasp the gravity of their mother's condition, which she later learned was bowel cancer discovered during a routine appendectomy. Victoria coped with the news by distancing herself emotionally, telling herself not to dwell on it and clinging to the hope that the doctors would eradicate the cancer. The initial surgery was followed by chemotherapy, a period marked by hopeful anticipation that was taxing on the entire family, despite her parents' attempts to maintain a positive facade. Victoria focused on enduring each day, week, and month, refusing to believe her mother might die, a possibility never directly suggested to her or Christopher. To further distract herself, she immersed herself in additional hobbies at school, joining the Army cadets and starting to play the drums, becoming the first female side drummer in the school's pipes and drums band. She also found solace in rock and metal music, spending her free time listening to bands like Metallica and Nirvana, while horse riding remained a key escape. While teachers and her best friend, Katrina, were aware of her mother's illness, they respected her space and only discussed it if she initiated the conversation. Despite her efforts to project a normal persona, there were moments when her emotions overwhelmed her, such as one instance during a study period where she couldn't stop crying, finding comfort in Katrina's support. Throughout her mother's regular hospital visits and demanding treatments, her resilience shone through as she would return home and resume her normal routines, including making school lunches. However, after a couple of years, her parents decided it was time for what her father referred to as their last family holiday. His announcement that they wanted to create happy memories if it was their final time together filled Victoria with dread. In a moment of unintended outburst, Victoria declared she didn't want to go, causing her mother's face to fall, which made her feel terrible. Despite her mother's attempts to entice her with the destination of Hawaii, Victoria remained resolute, feeling numb at the prospect of a final family vacation and realizing she wasn't ready to say goodbye, her young mind irrationally believing that her refusal to go could somehow prevent her mother's death. Despite the underlying knowledge that there was no hope, the family went on their dream holiday. Within weeks of their return, her father delivered more heartbreaking news. Her mother would need to move to a hospice. At the time, Victoria equated hospice with a regular hospital, not fully grasping that her mother would never return home. Later, during a conversation with her mother, the topic of Victoria's future arose. When her mother inquired about her career aspirations, Victoria caught off guard, initially thought of becoming a vet, but knew her grades weren't sufficient. She then mentioned physiotherapy as an interesting option, a choice influenced by her love for horse riding and the idea of caring for injured horses, which would require studying physiotherapy. Her mother smiled at this, the question stemming from a desire to know the direction their lives would take after she was gone. As Victoria spent nearly every day with her mother, she observed her growing weaker, a stark contrast to her inability to imagine a world without her. In September, a month before Victoria's 16th birthday, the family kissed their mother goodbye. The following days were a blur of relatives and funeral planning, offering little time for reflection. The day of her mother's funeral remains the hardest emotional event Victoria has ever endured, a physical agony despite her attempts to remain strong. Afterwards, as the initial influx of family subsided and the house grew quiet, the reality of their loss finally sank in. It was just the three of them now. Victoria's introduction to the world of skydiving began during her school years when she participated in a charity jump. At that time, over 60 pupils attended the initial meeting for the event. But when the day of the jump arrived, a smaller group of 5 students, including Victoria, traveled from Edinburgh to Nottingham in a borrowed Austin metro. This trip felt like her first real adventure away from home. During the journey, she experienced a mix of nerves and anticipation, yet she recalled being reasonably fearless as a kid due to her horse riding experiences, which had taught her to enjoy adrenaline. As they approached Langar Airfield, the sight of the small aircraft sparked a moment of apprehension, as she noted never having seen a plane so small. Her father had shared positive memories of his own younger skydiving experiences, which encouraged Victoria to give it a go, dismissing any mild nerves. They stayed in a bunkhouse at the parachute center, and while the evening was spent socializing, Victoria found herself unable to sleep that night due to nerves and excitement. The following morning, after attending ground schooling, the group boarded the aircraft for a tandem skydive, each paired with an instructor. As the plane ascended, the initial giddiness among the participants gradually subsided. When the instructor signaled that it was time, they were guided towards the open door. Hovering at the edge of the plane, Victoria felt petrified, but the sight of the landing area and the smell of aviation fuel created a moment of calmness. Despite a last-minute panic, the moment she tipped forward and left the aircraft, all her anxiety vanished. The rush of icy air and the feeling of utter freedom thousands of feet above any worries created a euphoric experience. Following a few seconds of freefall, the parachute opened with a sharp jolt, and after a safe landing, the adrenaline rush prompted an immediate desire to repeat the experience. Victoria described it as incredible and thought she could happily do it every day, feeling the spark of a new passion lighting up. That evening, as the car departed the parachute center to return to Scotland, she felt a sense of sadness, envying the instructors and wishing she could stay to learn more, although she recognized this was unrealistic at 17 with limited income. Victoria's journey into the British Army began during her time studying physiotherapy at university in Glasgow. Although she had been a member of the cadets at school, the prospect of joining the Army as an adult was not something she had seriously considered until her friend Kate suggested she accompany her to an officer training presentation for the military. The presentation was specifically aimed at medical and nursing students interested in joining the Royal Army Medical Corps. Feeling at a loose end and always open to new adventures, Victoria agreed to go along, initially viewing it as potentially fun. As the presentation commenced, featuring dynamic action shots on screen, the idea of excitement and service within the military immediately captured Victoria's imagination. One of the presenters highlighted the endless opportunities to work in different places and the potential for extensive global travel, portraying it as a life-changing experience. This sparked Victoria's thoughts about where such a path might lead her. She was also aware that her father would likely be supportive, given his parents' history of military service and the pride he would feel in her continuing that family tradition. Imagining the fast-paced life of the Army, the training, the military skills to be learned, and potential operations, Victoria recognized it as a stark contrast to her loving and comfortable childhood. Following the presentation, as Kate had gone to the bar, one of the speakers approached Victoria while she was looking at military leaflets. He inquired if she had ever considered joining the Army. Victoria admitted she was training to be a physiotherapist and questioned if there was even a place for her profession within the Army. The speaker assured her there was, handing a contact card and suggesting she get in touch to schedule an interview. This encounter planted the notion of a new opportunity, a new escape in her mind. Despite having what appeared to be a settled life, a postgraduate job at a local hospital, close friends, and a boyfriend, Victoria found herself feeling ever so slightly bored and with a yearning to do something more meaningful. The idea of joining the army presented itself as a potential new escape. Although she briefly considered working as a physiotherapist abroad, the seed of joining the army had taken root, and she resolved to attend an interview, albeit with the expectation that being selected would be difficult. To her surprise, just a few weeks later, she received an acceptance letter, providing the escape she had been searching for. Despite some initial apprehension about leaving her established life, Victoria knew she was making the right decision. After completing her degree, she worked at the local hospital for 6 months until her start date. Eventually, she packed all her belongings into her Nissan Micra and drove south to begin her army career, leaving behind her familiar life in Glasgow. Her initial training took place at Keogh Barracks in Aldershot, where she learned the basics of military life, including kit maintenance and army doctrine. This essential course was designed to integrate individuals with existing qualifications into the army structure. Following this, she moved on to the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst to begin a basic infantry course. Sandhurst proved to be both intimidating and thrilling, with a demanding schedule that tested her physical and mental resilience to assess her suitability as an officer. Despite the challenges of constant activity, minimal breaks, and limited sleep, she formed strong friendships with her peers, which she recognized would be crucial for coping with more stressful operational tours. After months of rigorous training in military medicine, infantry skills, leadership, and weapon handling, the time came for Victoria and her fellow trainees to state their preferences for their initial postings. As she mentions in the book I Survived, Victoria hoped to be stationed further north, closer to her family in Scotland. However, her hopes were dashed when the postings were announced, revealing her assignment to HMS Drake, a naval base in Plymouth. For Victoria, this news brought a wave of disappointment as she realized Plymouth, in the far southwest of England, was geographically one of the furthest points from her Scottish home, while still being on the same landmass. Having recently completed months of training focused on the army, Victoria now found herself posted to a naval establishment, where she anticipated a different environment and set of protocols. While she maintained a sense of excitement about this new move, the reality of living on the naval base brought with it a feeling of isolation. The distance from her familiar surroundings and loved ones triggered homesickness for her friends and family. Her work schedule involved a dual role, serving part-time at the naval base and part-time at Derriford Hospital. Upon returning to the mess after her shifts, she often found the atmosphere quiet and subdued. Despite the encroaching loneliness, Victoria consciously made an effort to keep herself occupied. As it transpired, her tenure at Derriford Hospital was relatively brief. After a period of 7 months, the Army reassigned her to a new placement in Aldershot, with the move scheduled to coincide with the new year. It was during this time that Victoria, like many in the UK, had been following news of the Balkans conflict. In June 1999, the deployment of one para-battle group, part of 5 Airborne Brigade, to North Macedonia near the Kosovo border, occurred. Subsequently, Victoria herself was deployed to Kosovo as part of 22 Field Hospital. Although admitting to nervousness about the unknown, she was eager to begin, recognizing this as her first opportunity to perform the job she had signed up for. The journey to Kosovo involved a flight on a Hercules, a military aircraft, and upon arrival at Skopje Airport, the intense dry heat was immediately apparent. A bus transported the personnel to their base, and en route, Victoria witnessed a landmine at the roadside, a stark reminder that this was no longer a training exercise. The field hospital had been established by an advanced team from the UK in Lipjan, a small town in East Kosovo, where the military had commandeered a building adjacent to a local prison, a location that would later present its own challenges. Upon arrival, Victoria was shown to the ward where she would be working, a large gym that had been converted to accommodate patients, with 3 lines of beds designated for Serbs, Albanians, and NATO soldiers to maintain segregation. Victoria's 4-month tenure in Kosovo provided a raw exposure to the brutal realities of human conflict. Patients frequently arrived at the hospital, bearing the physical scars of the conflict between Serbs and Albanians, suffering from bullet wounds, bloodied clothing, and missing limbs. Tragically, many of those injured were children, often victims of landmines detonated while playing. The accommodation for the medical staff was a basic 2-story concrete building where Victoria shared a room with 5 nurses. The conditions were Spartan. The room was dirty, smelled unpleasant, lacked glass in the windows, and had suspect stains on the walls. The only water source was a pipe in the toilet, and the dirty bed frames lacked mattresses. The team worked to clean the room as best they could, using plastic to cover the windows and sleeping on roll mats. Initially, there was no electricity or running water. One night, Victoria and others were on standby due to expected casualties, only to learn the next morning that the distant gunshots they had heard were the sounds of 12 farmers being killed by Serbs, with no survivors requiring treatment. This event was a stark illustration of the daily tragedies faced by the Kosovan civilians. During her deployment to Kosovo, Victoria's work as a physiotherapist often took her outside the relative safety of the hospital. As she recounts in I Survived, any movement beyond the hospital gates necessitated vehicle convoys. Even as these trips to conduct clinics in other areas of Kosovo became routine, it didn't stop the nerves jittering every time the hospital gates opened. The inherent dangers of the region meant that, quote, I kept my rifle with me at all times, the fear of the unknown forcing me to stay alert. The hospital's proximity to a prison brought added problems as unwelcome visitors threatened the staff, eventually requiring the presence of the Gurkhas for security. One of Victoria's early experiences involved witnessing the extensive destruction of a once thriving village, an event that brought home the stark realities of war. Despite the distressing nature of these experiences, Victoria felt that this deployment provided a profound and direct understanding of the world's atrocities, starkly contrasting with merely seeing them in the news. And it cultivated a deep appreciation for the relative peace and safety of life in the UK. One particularly poignant experience involved treating 2 young sisters who had survived a horrific attack in which the majority of their family was killed. Despite her lack of specific training in pediatrics or psychological trauma, she did her best to provide care, and although the older girl remained largely silent, there was a breakthrough when she smiled. Victoria felt conflicted and saddened when her deployment ended, just as she felt she was making progress with the child. The return to life in the UK proved more challenging than anticipated, with Victoria grappling with guilt over leaving behind those who were injured. She also experienced a sense of frustration and anger at those in the UK who seemed oblivious to the hardships faced by others. After her time in Kosovo, Victoria was promoted to captain and moved to a new posting at the Defense Medical Rehabilitation Center Headley Court near Epsom. As she describes in I Survived, Headley Court was a well-known center with a mix of complex injuries to treat, making the job full-on. However, by this point, Victoria found herself emotionally exhausted. Seeking a break from the demanding nature of her work, she spoke with another physiotherapist who suggested she explore adventure training. This idea surprised Victoria, given her primary experience in hospital settings within the military. Nonetheless, she decided to investigate the available courses and was presented with a long list of different sports and activities. As she read through the endless options, one activity suddenly caught her eye: parachuting. This sparked a memory of a charity jump she had done at school, which she had enjoyed, leading her to think, I'll give it another go. Victoria made a snap decision and signed up for a 2-week skydiving course at Weston-on-the-Green in Oxford, intending to try her hand at the sport once more. However, upon arriving at the parachute center, the weather proved to be significantly disruptive, with persistent rain leading to the cancellation of jumps for 4 consecutive days. To keep the participants entertained, one of the instructors showed videos of people performing various skydives. It was during these viewings that Victoria became utterly captivated by the clips of skydivers in free fall. She was mesmerized by their apparent freedom and the way they seemed like aerial gymnasts, spinning through the air at high speeds. Watching these displays, Victoria marveled at how incredible it looked and made a personal vow to continue in the sport until she could emulate those skills. When the weather finally improved and the course commenced, Victoria's initial experiences with static line jumping were far from the exhilarating vision she had cultivated. The constant circling of the aircraft to reach the jump altitude made her feel unwell, and the rushed, order-shouting atmosphere of the instructors instilled a sense of panic. By the time it was her turn to jump, she was absolutely terrified. This contrasted sharply with the calmer appearance of free fall in the videos she had watched. Frustrated by her lack of progress and increasing anxiety with each static line jump, Victoria sought guidance from one of the weekend instructors, a man named Paul. After admitting her struggles with static line jumping and expressing her preference for the seemingly calmer nature of free fall, Paul offered her the opportunity to do an accelerated freefall, level 1 jump the following morning. If she liked the experience, she could make the switch. This prospect immediately filled Victoria with hope. True to his word, Paul met her the next morning, and after a brief training session, they boarded the first lift of the day. Unlike the static line jumps, where silence and fear prevailed in the aircraft, Victoria was surprised to find the atmosphere during the ascent for the free fall jump to be relaxed, with jumpers even removing their helmets to chat. Upon reaching an altitude of approximately 13,000 feet, Victoria felt completely calm. Watching the other jumpers exit the aircraft one by one, she and her 2 instructors were the last to jump. With a smile and an eager nod, she confirmed she was ready. As they leaped from the aircraft, held by her instructors for the initial free fall, Victoria experienced that euphoria again. The sensation of being totally weightless, with the wind rushing past her face, brought about a feeling of freedom, total and utter freedom. From the moment she landed safely on the ground, Victoria had a massive grin that persisted for days. As soon as the adrenaline subsided, she immediately returned to the center to transfer her classes to an accelerated freefall program, realizing she was completely hooked. This marked the beginning of Victoria's deep immersion into the world of parachuting, a passion that would soon dominate her spare time and social life. Approximately a year after her split from a previous partner, Victoria met Brett, who was working in logistics. Their connection proved beneficial in unexpected ways, as his role in this area later helped during their deployment to Kosovo when he managed to obtain solar showers for her unit. After dating Brett for 2 years, Victoria decided to visit her father and stepmother, Frances, in Edinburgh, and she brought Brett with her. During this trip to Scotland, Brett made a positive impression on Victoria's family, charming her father and getting along well with her relatives. Victoria observed how effortlessly Brett interacted with her family, leading her to ponder if their relationship was truly meant to be. She noted that, quote, "On paper, he was perfect for me and I loved him." However, despite this seemingly ideal connection, a moment of hesitation arose during a visit to Edinburgh Castle. As Brett looked at her expectantly after finishing a drink in a pub, she agreed to his suggestion of a walk up to the castle. Victoria, being in the military, knew it would be relatively easy to gain access to the battlements after hours, but she was unaware that Brett had already made arrangements with the guards. They arrived at sunset and were allowed to wander the grounds without any trouble, reaching a spot with a stunning view of the city. While Victoria found the setting calming, Brett appeared preoccupied. It was then that he suddenly stopped and proposed marriage, kneeling down and presenting a ring. Victoria described the moment as textbook, acknowledging that she should be over the moon at the romantic gesture and the spectacular view. Yet, she experienced a slight sinking feeling that it wasn't quite right and questioned internally if she truly wanted to marry Brett. Despite her internal reservations, a few seconds of silence passed, and feeling pressured, Victoria panicked and accepted his proposal. The engagement initiated a period of wedding planning, during which differing visions for the ceremony began to surface. Brett envisioned an extravagant event in Sandhurst, down south, while Victoria harbored a preference for a small, intimate ceremony in her hometown, expressing discomfort at the thought of a large, attention-focused wedding. As Brett enthusiastically began organizing the wedding, Victoria found herself increasingly drawn to her parachuting, allowing wedding preparations to take a back seat. The sensation of jumping proved to be the only activity that calmed her mounting anxieties. Victoria's commitment to her skydiving became a point of contention in the relationship. Brett remarked on her frequently being away at the airfield, lamenting that, quote, "I hardly ever get to see you." He suggested she consider taking a break from jumping, a proposition she consistently refused, asserting that she couldn't halt her training given how far she had progressed. Victoria felt as though she was being compelled to choose between her fiancé and her passion for parachuting, a prospect that caused her significant apprehension. Amidst these growing tensions, Victoria's parents visited to assist with the wedding plans. Francis was enthusiastic about the organizational tasks, but Victoria's lack of excitement was noticeable to her father. Concerned by her demeanor, he directly questioned her feelings about the impending marriage, observing that she did not seem herself. In a moment of emotional vulnerability, Victoria admitted her uncertainty about wanting to go through with the wedding, expressing her confusion about determining if it was the right decision. Her father offered gentle counsel, suggesting that if she had met the right person, she would know. Both her father and Francis reassured her that it was not too late to stop things if she had doubts, a sentiment that brought Victoria a sense of relief. Following this conversation with her parents, Victoria came to the realization that she could not marry Brett. Her priorities lay with her skydiving, while Brett's focus was on building a life centered around marriage, and ultimately, she knew which path she could not forsake. Breaking the news to Brett left him crushed and elicited feelings of guilt in Victoria. Initially, she insisted that they were not breaking up, merely canceling the wedding plans. They attempted to navigate their relationship without the commitment of marriage, but the called-off engagement proved to be an insurmountable obstacle. Before long, Victoria moved alone from Headley Court to Pirbright. During their final conversation, Brett confessed that he had sensed her hesitation at Edinburgh Castle, but had dismissed it. Reflecting on their relationship with the clarity of hindsight, Victoria recognized that her affection for Brett was akin to that for a friend, rather than a romantic partner. At this point, Victoria, in her early 20s, rationalized the breakup by telling herself she had ample time for marriage in the future. Victoria and Liam's relationship began approximately a year after Victoria's broken engagement. At the time, Victoria was working at Pirbright, an army training regiment in Surrey, and Liam was a troop commander residing in the same mess. A significant connection formed through their shared passion for skydiving, a contrast to Victoria's previous partner who did not share this interest. Liam, being an active jumper, understood Victoria's dedication to the parachute center and often joined her for weekend jumps. Living in the same mess facilitated a rapid deepening of their bond as they spent their spare time together. Approximately a year after their initial meeting, Liam proposed, and this time, Victoria felt confident in the relationship, noting her complete trust in him and her family's positive opinion of him. Their wedding plans were soon impacted by Liam's abrupt posting to Northern Ireland as a watchkeeper, an operations officer in a brigade HQ. This role involved shift work, limiting their time off, and resulting in a small wedding ceremony at Victoria's home church of Haddington in 2004. Only family and close friends attended, and they forgo a honeymoon due to Liam's work schedule. For a period, they maintained a long-distance marriage, connecting through nightly phone calls and text messages, with Liam returning home on Friday evenings. After 6 months of marriage, they established a home together in Oakham, purchasing a small terraced house. However, Managing a weekend-based relationship proved more challenging than they anticipated, leading to a growing distance between them. Victoria's involvement in a local parachuting team, which required weekend training, further strained their limited shared time. About a year into her marriage with Liam, Victoria began to notice unsettling changes in his behavior. As she recounts in I Survived, their communication dwindled, and he became increasingly protective of his phone. Victoria observed concerning messages from a woman, initially thought to be named Lucy, which hinted at an intimate connection. Initially, she attributed these shifts to the stress of Liam's demanding bomb disposal training. While their relationship briefly seemed to improve after his course ended, the underlying issues persisted. They also discussed the practical challenges of starting a family given their separate military careers. In 2007, Victoria made the decision to leave the Army and take a physiotherapy role with the Ministry of Defense. This move was intended to provide her with more personal freedom and the ability to follow Liam's postings, a plan he supported. They also considered starting a family at this time, feeling some external pressure to do so. However, the growing distance and Victoria's increasing suspicions cast a shadow over their plans. The fragile state of their marriage was further exposed when Victoria received an unexpected phone call from Lucy, who, speaking with a Canadian accent, claimed to be on a course with Liam and made complimentary remarks about him. This call aroused Victoria's suspicions, and upon investigating Liam's phone, she confronted Lucy about the messages she had seen. Lucy initially denied an affair, but eventually admitted to it, revealing it had been ongoing for nearly a year, starting after a social event. Victoria then confronted Liam, who confessed to the affair, explaining it began when Lucy followed him to his room after a mess function. Despite this significant betrayal, Victoria and Liam attempted to salvage their marriage by moving to Colchester, where Victoria secured a job. However, in 2008, the intensification of the conflict in Afghanistan led to Liam's deployment, causing Victoria considerable anxiety. While Liam was serving in Afghanistan, Victoria noticed further concerning communications on his phone, this time with a woman named Emma. Despite trying to be understanding of the stressful environment Liam was in, Victoria's trust in him had been severely eroded. She even had a brief conversation with Emma. During Liam's deployment, Victoria pursued her goal of becoming an accelerated free-fall instructor at Netheravon Parachute Center, a decision that involved travel from Colchester. In 2009, Victoria achieved her instructor qualification. Upon Liam's return from Afghanistan, Victoria proposed that they give their marriage another chance, but he did not agree, leading to their separation, although they maintained amicable relations. Victoria and Emil's connection began at the same gym where they both worked, Victoria as a physiotherapist and Emil as a physical training instructor. Their initial interactions were professional, sparked when Emil sustained a skiing accident and became Victoria's patient. Through the course of his physiotherapy sessions, a friendship gradually developed between them, although without an immediate romantic attraction. However, over several months, Victoria found herself increasingly drawn to Emil's personality, specifically his drive, ambition, and passion. This evolving connection eventually led to a noticeable romantic spark between them. As their friendship deepened, Victoria sought clarity on Emil's personal circumstances and asked him if he was still married. Emil disclosed that he was married on paper but separated from his wife. Initially, this revelation caused Victoria some uncertainty, given her previous relationship history, but her concerns were somewhat alleviated when she learned that Emil was residing in the mess, indicating the truthfulness of his separation. Victoria's life took a new direction when Emil contacted her via Facebook, inviting her out for a drink. Prior to this, Victoria had professionally transferred his physiotherapy care to a colleague. This first date marked the beginning of their romantic involvement, and as Victoria describes in I Survived, they soon began spending many evenings together at her house in Bulford. These hours were filled with late-night conversations where they shared details about their lives, motivations, and future aspirations, establishing a strong initial connection. Within just a few weeks of dating, Victoria and Emil became inseparable, and Victoria eagerly learned about his background, including his origins in Cape Town, South Africa, and his experiences of moving to the UK as an adult. This whirlwind romance quickly led to a deep and seemingly promising relationship. Emil also shared the circumstances of his marriage to Carly, explaining that it occurred after only a few months of dating when she became pregnant. He admitted that it wasn't initially a serious relationship and that he hadn't particularly wanted to stay with her, but he felt it was the right thing to do, choosing to remain in the UK rather than return to South Africa. Victoria respected his decision and liked that he had stood by his child. Emil further revealed that they had a registry office wedding to facilitate his stay in the country, and that he had never truly loved Carly, marrying her primarily to be present for their child. He spoke negatively about his ex-wife, which caused Victoria a slight discomfort, although she initially dismissed any alarm bells. Their relationship continued to move at a rapid pace, characterized by Emil's intense focus and constant attention towards Victoria. After only a few weeks of dating, Emil declared his love for Victoria, and she reciprocated his feelings. She found his attentiveness a stark contrast to her previous marriage with Liam. Emil made efforts to prioritize their time together, even canceling other plans. After a few months of this intense courtship, Emil moved into Victoria's house, a step that felt like a natural progression given how much time they were already spending together. The emergence of financial issues in Victoria and Emil's relationship began relatively soon after they became more serious, and particularly after Emil moved into Victoria's house. Initially, Emil had alluded to having some debts, but this was not a topic he wished to discuss in the early stages of their relationship. However, approximately a month or so after he moved in with Victoria, the subject of his financial situation came to the forefront. In one evening, Emil confided in Victoria that his debts were primarily due to his ex-wife, Carly. He explained that Carly had stopped working and would spend money from their joint account while staying at home. This revelation was described by Victoria as feeling like another bombshell. Despite this, Victoria also sensed Emil's embarrassment in disclosing his financial difficulties and felt sympathetic towards his desire to regain control of his finances. When Victoria inquired about the total amount he owed, Emil stated it was around £2,000. Showing her commitment to building a life together, Victoria offered to clear this debt for Emil, with the understanding that he would pay her back. Emil's reaction was one of immediate relief at this proposition. To facilitate his repayment and to manage household expenses moving forward, they later made the decision to open a joint bank account. In the interim, while waiting for Emil to become more financially stable, Victoria taught him how to pack parachutes at the airfield. Emil quickly became proficient at this skill and began accompanying Victoria to the parachute center to earn money packing parachutes. This additional income allowed Emil to repay the £2,000 to Victoria quite fast. With this initial debt cleared and a joint account established, it appeared that their financial relationship was on a more stable footing. However, this initial resolution would prove to be a temporary reprieve from ongoing financial strains. In January 2011, just over a year after their initial meeting, Victoria and Emil embarked on a 3-week trip to South Africa to visit Emil's parents and for Victoria to meet his family. Victoria was received warmly and felt welcomed. They made every effort to ensure the couple's stay was enjoyable and memorable. This trip marked a significant step in their relationship, allowing Victoria to experience Emil's background and culture firsthand. During their time in Cape Town, Emil suggested they climb Table Mountain. Despite Emil's previous training of Victoria on a local climbing wall and his own comfort as a keen rock climber who had recovered well from a skiing injury, the ascent proved to be quite challenging for her. It involved a multi-pitch technique, with Emil guiding Victoria on how to anchor herself to the rock. After several hours under the hot sun, Victoria grew tired and frustrated, questioning how much longer the climb would take. While Emil kept assuring her they were nearing the top, she felt as if they had been climbing for an eternity. Upon finally reaching the summit, Victoria admitted that it was tougher than she had anticipated. Although there was a moment of slight tension, they admired the view before deciding to take the cable car back down, a suggestion Victoria readily accepted. Despite the strenuous Table Mountain experience, their trip continued positively, and a few days later, they visited a cheetah sanctuary. Here, they were allowed to interact closely with the rescued animals. As they were observing them, and after a few questions to the minder, Emile took Victoria's hand and proposed marriage, presenting her with a diamond ring that had been placed on the cheetah's collar. Overwhelmed with emotion, Victoria joyfully accepted his proposal. The staff at the sanctuary applauded their engagement. Amidst the excitement, they discussed their wedding plans and decided to get married in South Africa. This decision was partly due to Emile's explanation that his parents would likely not be able to afford flights to England. After a quick phone call with her father, Victoria confirmed that he and Francis would be delighted to travel to South Africa for the wedding. Filled with happiness, they spent the remainder of their holiday looking at potential wedding venues for September of that year. The wedding ceremony, a significant milestone in their relationship, took place at Camps Bay, a picturesque location overlooking the sea. As Victoria walked down the aisle accompanied by her father, the reality of the moment, fulfilling a long-held dream, struck her deeply. She reflected on the baby she was carrying, nestled safely in her womb, a child she had always wanted. Walking towards Emile, who awaited her, Victoria felt a profound sense of happiness, believing that life could not be more perfect at that moment. Approximately 2 years after their initial meeting and 9 months following their engagement in the same country at a cheetah sanctuary, Victoria and Emile were united in marriage. The ceremony marked a significant step in their life together, solidifying their commitment in a setting that held special significance for Emile and with the blessing of Victoria's family. Emile appeared to be very involved in this pregnancy, downloading apps to track the baby's development. However, during their brief return to London, Victoria noticed she had started to bleed. A sense of immediate panic and the foreboding feeling that something was wrong prompted an urgent trip to the hospital. There, lying on the examination table, Victoria endured the agonizing silence of the sonographer's search for a sign of life. The confirmation came with the arrival of a doctor who delivered the devastating news. No heartbeat could be found, and Victoria had miscarried the baby. Victoria became pregnant again 6 weeks later. The news brought excitement, especially as they traveled to Emile's hometown with their unborn child. Although Emile had children from a previous relationship, this felt like a first for both, with Emile deeply engaged in the pregnancy, tracking progress daily. The pregnancy was turbulent. Victoria experienced frequent bleeding and hemorrhaging, triggering repeated hospital visits and fears of another loss. Doctors diagnosed a threatened miscarriage, and the stress was emotionally draining. Relief came at 28 weeks, when medical intervention would be possible if needed. As maternity leave approached in April 2012, a 36-week scan revealed the baby had stopped growing. Faced with waiting or inducing labor, Victoria chose induction. Emile rushed to gather baby supplies, as Victoria had avoided buying anything due to past losses. The labor was long and painful. Just as she requested an epidural, the baby began to crown. With a final push, their daughter was born, weighing 4 pounds and 1 ounce. Her cry brought overwhelming relief. They named her April, a name Emile loved. Complications continued as the placenta didn't deliver naturally, requiring surgery. Still, Victoria finally felt at peace, confident Emile would care for them. Their early days, though spent in hospital as April gained strength, were filled with love and a smooth transition into family life. Victoria recounted noticing small amounts being withdrawn from their joint account periodically. Over time, these withdrawals became more frequent and larger. Red bills started arriving, including a warning letter from Next for an unpaid order that Victoria had not made. She later discovered that Emile had taken out an overdraft in her name and eventually a loan. When Victoria questioned Emile about these financial discrepancies, he would often have an excuse, such as a mix-up at work with his wages. He frequently reacted defensively, accusing Victoria of not trusting him if she expressed any doubt. To avoid arguments and his subsequent sulking, Victoria often let the financial problems fester. She would sometimes send Emil money to cover overdrafts in an attempt to get their finances back on track, but the debts persisted. Victoria suspected Emil was spending money on his hobbies, but he would deny purchasing new equipment. Despite these ongoing financial strains, in the summer of 2013, Emil suggested they move house. The house Victoria had bought previously was old, and with a garden that had steep drops, she was increasingly worried about their daughter April's safety. Although Victoria had concerns about their ability to afford a move, Emil was set on a fresh start and arranged a meeting with the bank. At the meeting, it became clear that their financial problems were significant, as the bank refused to offer them a mortgage due to their poor credit rating, stemming from loans and unpaid bills in Victoria's name. Victoria was embarrassed by the extent of their debts, realizing that Emil was draining her savings. Following the bank's refusal, Emil suggested they use Victoria's inheritance from her recently deceased grandmother to buy a new house. Victoria doubted this would cover the costs and felt moving was not feasible at that time. Undeterred, Emil then proposed that Victoria ask her brother Christopher for help. Initially hesitant to ask for such a large sum, Victoria eventually agreed, and Christopher happily offered to help them buy a new home. However, both Christopher and Victoria's father insisted that the deed to the new house would be in Victoria's name only, and that Victoria and Emil would sign a post-nuptial agreement. This was to ensure Victoria retained the house if their marriage broke down, given the significant amount of her and her family's money involved. They quickly found a new build with an enclosed garden suitable for April. While Victoria liked the house, she worried that the monthly repayments to Christopher would be more than they could comfortably afford. She suggested applying for planning permission for their current house instead, believing it would be much cheaper. However, Emil was adamant about moving to the new house, stating it would be better for raising children. Emil offered to pay the majority of the money back to Christopher each month to alleviate Victoria's worries. Despite this assurance, Victoria was concerned, given Emil's track record with finances, and feared his unreliability could strain her relationship with her brother. To mitigate this, Victoria decided that Emil would transfer the agreed monthly amount into her account, and she would then pay Christopher, ensuring the payments were made even if Emil failed to follow through. For the first few months after the move, this payment plan worked. But soon Victoria started to notice missed transfers, with Emil blaming further mix-ups with his wages. Eventually, all of the monthly bills fell back to Victoria. Financial strains were not the only source of growing unease in Victoria's marriage. A significant breach of trust occurred when a friend contacted Victoria, expressing discomfort and revealing that Emil had been sending inappropriate messages to her teenage daughter. Initially, Victoria was in disbelief, thinking Emil wouldn't do that. However, her denial quickly turned to dismay when her friend provided screenshots of the unsettling messages, which included questions like, "Do you have a boyfriend?" and comments such as, "You look really nice this evening." When confronted with this evidence, Emil vehemently denied any wrongdoing, offering an unbelievable explanation, quote, "My phone must have been cloned," he insisted, adding, "Well, my Apple account must have been hacked or something," adamant that he hadn't sent the texts. As Victoria recounts in I Survived, despite his insistent denials and his attempts to deflect blame by bringing up her insecurities related to her ex-husband's infidelity, she found it increasingly difficult to believe him. This incident was a stark example of how Emil eroded her self-trust through deflection and improbable explanations, mirroring common tactics of gaslighting. Victoria's trust was further eroded by an incident at a friend's party. In a casual setting, a phone screen lit up with a Tinder notification. When a friend jokingly asked who it belonged to, Emil readily claimed it as his own. As Victoria describes in I Survived, this triggered a wave of sickness and betrayal. Later, feeling increasingly suspicious, Victoria downloaded Tinder herself and found Emil on the app. When she confronted him, Emil reacted defensively, accusing her of not trusting him and suggesting she was trying to catch him out. His explanation, that his friends had put him on Tinder for a laugh, felt hollow and dismissive. He further attempted to deflect responsibility by attributing her concerns to issues related to her previous marriage. This consistent deflection and lack of plausible explanation amplified Victoria's growing suspicions and her feeling of being trapped in a relationship marked by deceit, especially as she was pregnant at the time. This pattern of dismissal and blame shifting was a key element of the gaslighting she experienced, isolating her and making her doubt her own instincts. In October of 2014, Emil had announced a work-related ski trip to Austria, lasting several weeks. Victoria, pregnant at the time, felt this news created a further divide between them. Although Emil offered for her to join for a few days, Victoria declined, citing her need to care for their daughter, April, and perceiving his invitation as insincere. Left alone while heavily pregnant, Victoria was increasingly anxious about the possibility of another miscarriage and felt emotionally overwhelmed by Emil's absence and lack of support. His contact with her during this time was infrequent and primarily for sexual messages, revealing a stark disinterest in her well-being. The Christmas period offered little respite. Despite being physically present with family, Emil remained emotionally distant, often engrossed in his phone and detached from those around him. Against this backdrop of financial instability and increasing distrust fueled by Emil's behavior, Victoria began to consider the future security of her children. By December 2014, with her concerns mounting, Victoria made the decision to change her will. Her primary motivation was to ensure that her estate would be directly inherited by her children. This decision was influenced by Emil's admitted poor management of money, leading Victoria to lack confidence that any inheritance left to him would be used for the benefit of their daughter April and their unborn son Ben. Victoria intended to convey her reasoning to Emil, expressing her love for him and acknowledging him as an amazing father, while still prioritizing the financial well-being of their children in the event of her death. This act emphasized the growing chasm between Victoria and Emil, as she took steps to protect her children's future in light of his unreliable behavior and the deterioration of their relationship. Shortly after the holiday, Emil presented Victoria with another unexpected announcement. He would be away for a further couple of weeks over the new year. He claimed it was a work commitment, requiring him to run a course in Germany. Victoria was immediately skeptical, knowing that even reserve military personnel typically did not work during the holiday season. Emil's explanation shifted, stating that this last-minute trip would aid him in obtaining support for his British passport, a justification Victoria found manipulative. 7 months pregnant, and with a growing sense of unease, Victoria did not argue further as Emil packed to leave. A palpable sense of dread filled Victoria as she waved Emil goodbye. Her suspicions were soon confirmed when she received a notification from her bank regarding bounced transactions on her credit card. Emil had attempted to purchase flight details and conduct currency exchange using her funds without her consent. When Victoria confronted him over the phone, Emil became defensive and angry, insisting it was a legitimate last-minute work trip for which he would be reimbursed. Despite his claims, Victoria felt increasingly trapped, convinced that her husband no longer loved her and was using her for financial gain. Once Emil had departed for what he claimed was Paderborn, Germany, Victoria found herself consumed by worry, a stark contrast to the relief she might have expected at his absence. Seeking reassurance, or perhaps confirmation of her unease, Victoria contacted a friend who had previously been stationed at the same base in Germany. When Victoria mentioned Emil's location, her friend calmly stated that Paderborn was a large site with comprehensive internet connectivity. This information immediately embarrassed Victoria for even voicing her concerns, as it contradicted the narrative Emil would later present. Indeed, shortly after his departure, Emil texted Victoria claiming that the reception in Paderborn was poor and there was no Wi-Fi. Victoria recognized this as a blatant lie, especially in light of her friend's information. Emil's subsequent cold texts further solidified Victoria's conviction that he was deliberately deceiving her and concealing something. As New Year's Day arrived with no sign of Emil's return and his continued evasiveness, Victoria spent the day in tears, facing the devastating reality that her husband was likely having an affair. This trip to Paderborn, shrouded in lies and financial irregularities, became another significant marker in the erosion of trust within their marriage. One morning, Victoria awoke and went downstairs to the kitchen to prepare April's lunchbox. Upon opening a cupboard next to the hob, she detected an unusual smell and suspected it might be gas. Investigating further behind some food, she located a pipe leading to the cooker and confirmed the faint smell of gas. Victoria immediately turned off the liver attached to the pipe. Notably, she observed what appeared to be dried blood around the liver. This was significant as Emil had recently cut his hand and bled quite a lot, requiring Victoria to clean the surrounding surfaces. Concerned, Victoria texted Emil about the gas smell and the dried blood on the lever. Emil's initial reply was to question if the stove was working, a response Victoria found dismissive. She retorted that she was not going to test it for fear of causing an explosion. Emil then instructed her via text to open all the windows and doors and let the house air out. Victoria followed his instructions, and after some time the smell seemed to dissipate, prompting her to turn the gas lever back on. However, the strong smell of gas returned immediately, forcing her to turn it off again. Finding herself alone with April upstairs, Victoria decided to call a gasman. Upon his arrival that evening, the gas engineer identified the problem as a loose bolt on the pipe. He tightened it, assuring Victoria that there should be no further issues. Later, reflecting on the incident and a recent magazine article she had read about a husband trying to harm his wife, Victoria sent a joking text message to Emil, asking if he was trying to kill her. Emil's swift and defensive reply questioned her seriousness and mentioned she had been saying that a lot recently, which Victoria did not recall. She explained her joke referenced the magazine story and the blood on the handle. Emil's strong reaction struck Victoria as unusual and excessive. As Victoria considered returning to the skies after a break following the birth of her son Ben, she visited the parachute center to check her own equipment. There, she was informed that the automatic activation device, or AAD, on her parachute rig was out of date, rendering her equipment unusable for several weeks pending servicing. Despite this setback to their plans for a joint jump, Victoria inquired about the possibility of renting skydiving equipment. At home, she informed Emil that she would need to hire a kit if she were to jump. The Saturday prior to the jump, Victoria and Emil took their children to the parachute center. While there, Victoria needed to complete her annual membership paperwork and renew her certifications as an AFF instructor. She recalled a time when she might have spent entire weekends at the center and contemplated whether continuing with skydiving was taking too much time away from her family life with Emil and their children. Due to the dismal weather conditions that Saturday, precluding any jumping, Victoria made the decision, with Emil's agreement, to keep a rented parachute overnight in her locker, a deviation from the usual procedures where parachutes were always returned to the kit room. Victoria had agreed, partly hoping to rediscover her enjoyment of the sport and decide whether to continue her role as an instructor. However, Emil later indicated he would not be joining her, citing a lack of childcare arrangements, though he encouraged her to jump on her own. This set the stage for Victoria's solo skydive on Sunday, April 5th, a decision influenced by Emil's encouragement and the availability of rented equipment after her own gear was deemed out of service. The morning of Sunday, April 5th, 2015, dawned with Victoria already facing exhaustion following a restless night spent caring for her 5-week-old baby Ben. Despite being a seasoned skydiver and AFF instructor, a sense of foreboding accompanied her planned return to the skies, her first jump in over a year. Upon arriving at the airfield, Victoria encountered an initial delay as low cloud cover made jumping conditions unsuitable. This resulted in the decision to conduct a hop and pop, a low-level jump. Throughout the morning, Emil maintained contact via text messages, offering encouragement. Despite his support, Victoria harbored a strong, almost sixth sensory apprehension about the impending jump, a feeling she couldn't quite articulate, but which filled her with unease. She had even silently resolved that this would be her final skydive. When the weather conditions improved sufficiently for a brief window, Victoria boarded the aircraft with a group of other jumpers. The plane ascended to a lower altitude than usual due to the cloud base, reaching a maximum of around 5,000 feet for the planned hop and pop. Once the aircraft was in position, the other jumpers began to exit, and Victoria waited her turn at the open door, staring at the ground 3,000 feet below. Upon receiving the signal, she took a breath and leapt from the plane. As she fell, a rush of cold air hit her face, and for a fleeting moment she felt a sense of calm, her expertise taking over. She executed the initial stages of the freefall with practiced control before reaching for the toggle to deploy her main parachute. However, instead of the expected deceleration, Victoria felt an uneven jolt. Looking up, she was immediately shocked to see that the lines connecting her to the parachute canopy were badly twisted. Drawing on her extensive training, Victoria initiated corrective maneuvers, kicking through the air in a circular motion to unravel the entangled ropes. While this action successfully untangled the lines, it became horrifyingly clear that the main parachute was still not functioning correctly and was failing to provide the necessary drag to slow her descent. Despite her efforts to release the brake lines and forcefully pull on the opposing riser to counter the unpredictable movement, the parachute remained unresponsive. Recognizing that the standard emergency procedures were not resolving the critical malfunction, and with the ground rapidly approaching, Victoria made a swift and decisive choice. She pulled the cutaway pad on her harness, detaching the useless main parachute, and immediately deployed the handle for her reserve parachute, her last remaining option in this life-threatening emergency. Holding her breath, Victoria braced for the sharp jolt that typically accompanies the rapid deployment of a reserve parachute. Yet as it opened, she felt nothing. Looking up in horror, she saw that the reserve canopy had only partially inflated, with one side flapping uselessly in the wind. This catastrophic malfunction caused the reserve parachute to spin violently out of control, throwing Victoria across the sky until she was nearly upside down. Desperately fighting for survival, she tugged at the risers above her head and kicked her legs in the opposite direction of the spin, struggling against the immense forces. For a brief moment, these frantic efforts seemed to yield some result as the lines began to untangle, offering a fleeting sense of relief. However, this respite was short-lived, as the violent spinning resumed with even greater intensity. The malfunctioning parachute continued to thrash her through the air in a dizzying haze as she relentlessly fought to regain control, her gaze fixed on the failing canopy above, unaware of how perilously close she was to the ground. In the midst of the chaotic spin and uncontrolled descent, a sudden loud metallic bang occurred, and then everything went black. Following the catastrophic double parachute failure on April 5, 2015, Victoria plummeted approximately 3,000 feet before a violent impact brought her ordeal to a sudden halt. Regaining consciousness on the soft, plowed field, she was immediately aware of the smell of dirt and the feel of the ground beneath her. Despite the immense forces involved in the fall, Victoria discovered that she could move her fingers and toes, a small but crucial sign of life amidst the chaos. Within moments, a familiar face appeared as Kate, a friend from the parachute center and a trained doctor, knelt beside her to provide initial assessment. The worried expressions of others who had witnessed the horrific descent surrounded her as the distant wail of an ambulance grew louder. Her world then faded to black once more. The next time Victoria opened her eyes, she was strapped to a stretcher, the rhythmic whirring of helicopter rotors above, indicating her rapid transport. Confusion momentarily set in as she questioned why she was not being taken to the closer hospital in Salisbury. A paramedic explained that Southampton possessed the major trauma unit necessary for her critical condition. Despite feeling surprisingly devoid of pain and underestimating the severity of her situation, Victoria drifted back into unconsciousness as the helicopter approached its destination. Upon arrival at Southampton, she was wheeled into the bustling environment of A&E. The scene was surreal, with numerous medical professionals attending to her, removing her damaged skydiving equipment and dressing her in a hospital gown. Through the haze of her altered consciousness, she registered doctors checking her intravenous drip and issuing instructions to the team. Upon fully waking up later in A&E, Victoria found Emile by her side, slouched in a chair. His initial reaction was a small smile and an unemotional statement. "Finally, you're awake. How are you feeling?" When Victoria apologized for the hassle, Emile's response of "it's fine" was noted by Victoria, who felt he did not disagree with the implicit suggestion that the incident was her fault. Later, when Victoria woke again, Emile informed her that he had called her parents. While Victoria described his tone as comforting, the news itself made her feel worse. As Victoria endured significant pain from her injuries, she observed Emile seemingly engrossed in his phone. When she asked about what was happening with her medical care, he was slow to find out information. Lying flat on her back, reflecting on her near-death experience, Victoria noticed the bored expression on his face and internally pleaded for a kiss and a hug, which he did not offer. During a particularly agonizing moment when doctors had to move her, Victoria screamed in desperation, and Emile looked on in silence. Over the course of the following day in the hospital, Victoria noted that Emile provided the necessary practical support, ensuring the children were cared for and bringing her anything she asked for. However, she keenly felt the absence of emotional support, which she deeply needed. Victoria later became aware that her father and his partner, Francis, had arrived at the hospital, and she could sense growing tension between her father and Emile. Friends also commented on Emile's lack of concern, with one remarking they would take weeks off work if their wife were in such a situation, which embarrassed Victoria. She also observed that Emile never took up the nurse's offer for flexible visiting hours to bring their children to see her. However, there was a moment of apparent support when the chief instructor and another person from the parachute center informed Victoria and Emile about missing slinks from her parachute. At this news, Victoria crumbled and Emile hugged her as she broke down in tears. Furthermore, when Victoria's friend Alex later suggested reporting the incident to the police due to concerns about it not being an accident, Emile was encouraging, stating, "Yeah, you should. Why not?" Victoria underwent surgery on her pelvis, a complex procedure lasting several hours, where the surgeon meticulously pieced the fractured bones back together, securing them with internal medical hardware. Following the operation, she remained in intensive care to recover. Confined to her bed and facing the arduous journey of healing, Victoria understandably longed to see her young children. The medical staff, while sympathetic, deemed it unsafe for April and Ben to visit the ward. Lying flat on her back proved increasingly uncomfortable, and she required the assistance of multiple nurses to perform log rolls every few hours to alleviate the pressure. A spinal surgeon conducted a thorough examination, confirming the presence of a burst fracture in her T8 vertebra and highlighting its potential instability. To address this, he proposed surgical stabilization, but first required Victoria to be weaned off the powerful fentanyl. Once the fentanyl was discontinued and replaced with oral pain medication, she was fitted with a back brace to support her spine. Physiotherapy became a crucial component of her recovery. Initially, sitting up caused severe dizziness, a magnified sensation akin to a terrible hangover. Gradually, with determined effort, she increased the time she could sit upright. She progressed to using a large pulpit frame for her first tentative steps, followed by a Zimmer frame and eventually a pair of crutches, diligently working to regain her mobility while still unable to bear weight fully on her right leg. Regular physiotherapy sessions included practicing walking to the bathroom and, crucially, navigating a set of stairs, a significant milestone in her journey back to independence. After just over 2 weeks of intensive care and determined rehabilitation, the medical team deemed Victoria well enough to be discharged from the hospital. Back home, and 2 days after April's birthday, Victoria was feeding baby Ben when Emil rushed downstairs. "I'm late for work," he said. "See you tonight." "Okay," she replied, hearing the front door slam behind him. Emil never returned. That evening, while watching cartoons with April, Victoria realized it had been past the time Emil should have been back from work. Then, a knock at the door interrupted them. With Ben on his playmat and crutches under each arm, Victoria answered to find 2 men. "Good evening, Mrs. Cilliers," one said. "I'm Detective Inspector Paul Franklin from Wiltshire Police. May we come in?" Startled and anxious, she led them to the living room. As they sat, dread filled her. Then came the shock. "Your husband has been arrested," said D.I. Franklin. "What for?" she asked, stunned. "On suspicion of your attempted murder." Victoria's reaction to this revelation was one of utter shock and confusion. As she recounted, the words hit her with the force of a physical blow, leaving her stumped and repeatedly asking, "What?" The very idea that foul play was involved in her accident, let alone that her husband would be suspected of trying to kill her, was something she had not even considered. She found the information incomprehensible, the words failing to align with her reality. Victoria's instinctive response was a desire to speak with her husband. However, the officers present informed her that this was impossible. They explained that Emil was a suspect in an ongoing investigation, and therefore any contact was prohibited. This news added to Victoria's bewilderment and prompted her to question the basis of their suspicion. Overwhelmed and seeking support, Victoria informed the officers of her intention to call her father. The day that began with her continued recovery took a dark and unexpected turn with the arrest of the man she had married. The police investigation into Victoria's near-fatal parachute jump began on or shortly after April 5, 2015, while she was hospitalized with severe injuries. Initially, the focus may have been on standard procedures following a skydiving accident. However, the narrative suggests that concerns arose, leading to a deeper inquiry. Alex, a friend of Victoria's, played a role by suggesting that the incident be reported to the police for proper investigation. Victoria, initially hesitant and concerned about Emil's reaction, discussed this with him. Notably, Emil encouraged her to proceed with reporting the incident, stating that if there was something to investigate, they should, and even if it was nothing, it would put everyone at the parachute center's minds at rest. This seemingly supportive stance would later be viewed in the context of his potential involvement. As the police investigation into the circumstances surrounding her catastrophic parachute failure gained momentum, Victoria began to learn the devastating truth about the extent of her husband Emil's deception. It was during subsequent visits from the police that the layers of Emil's betrayal started to peel away, revealing a much darker picture than Victoria had ever imagined. A significant revelation came when the police informed Victoria about the findings of a search conducted at Emil's barracks. There, they had uncovered pictures of his girlfriend, starkly contrasting with the complete absence of any photos of Victoria or their children. This visual evidence underscored the emotional distance Emil had created in their marriage. The officers proceeded to detail that Emil had been having an affair for some time and had been actively planning to move in with this other woman. This information alone was a crushing blow for Victoria, who had been trying to reconcile the difficulties in their relationship. However, the police disclosures went further, painting a picture of calculated deceit. Victoria learned that Emil had concocted a web of lies for his girlfriend, telling her that his marriage with Victoria was over, that Victoria had been unfaithful to him, and, most shockingly, that their infant son Ben was not his biological child. This fabrication showed the depth of Emil's manipulation and his intention to sever all ties with his existing family. Adding another layer of betrayal, the police revealed the precarious state of Emil's finances. Despite Victoria's knowledge of some money issues and her efforts to help him, she was informed that Emil had accrued lots of debts, significantly more than she had been aware of. The officers disclosed that Emile had even misled Victoria about clearing his debts, having taken money from her under false pretenses. The investigation suggested a clear financial motive, with the implication that Emile was planning to start this new life free from his financial obligations to Victoria and potentially benefiting from her demise. Victoria's reaction to this news was one of devastation and anger, leading her to throw away her wedding ring. The police also began to scrutinize the circumstances surrounding the jump itself and the equipment. The chief instructor at the parachute center later offered his expertise, and discussions revealed that the absence of crucial loops from the reserve parachute was considered unlikely to be accidental. Emile's behavior on the day of the jump, including his keen interest in the weather forecast and encouragement for Victoria to jump, despite reportedly wanting to leave her, also raised suspicion. Following the devastating revelations about Emile's affair and financial deception, Victoria provided the police with further details about their relationship. During one of these subsequent interviews, and prompted by the interviewing officer's question about anything else odd happening recently, Victoria's mind flashed back to a gas leak incident that had occurred approximately a week before her ill-fated parachute jump. She recounted to the police the details of finding a gas smell in her kitchen and contacting Emile, who was away at the time. Victoria explained how Emile had instructed her over the phone to open windows and doors and how his overall behavior over it seemed odd. A gas man who later inspected the leak found a loose bolt on the pipe. Notably, Victoria also shared with the police a text message exchange she had with Emile following the incident, where she had jokingly asked him, "Are you trying to kill me?" In light of the subsequent parachute failure and the unfolding investigation into attempted murder, this seemingly innocuous earlier event took on a more sinister significance for the authorities. This gas leak incident became a second focus of the attempted murder charges against Emile. As the police investigation progressed and suspicion against Emile solidified, social services became involved with Victoria's children, April and Ben. This involvement was a direct consequence of Emile's arrest on suspicion of attempting to murder Victoria and the reckless endangerment of the children's lives since they were in the house during the earlier gas leak incident. Victoria was informed that her children were being placed on the Children's Protection Register because they were considered at risk from Emile. This development necessitated regular visits and meetings with social services, adding another layer of complexity and emotional distress to Victoria's already tumultuous situation. Victoria experienced this involvement as deeply unsettling, feeling judged and even momentarily suspected of harming her own child. Further emphasizing the intensity of the police investigation, Victoria's property was subjected to a search under a warrant. One morning, a significant number of police officers arrived at Victoria's house with vans to execute this search. The search involved a thorough examination of her home, including ripping up carpets and pulling everything out of the garage. A gas specialist was also present, who removed the valve from the gas pipe by the cooker, inspecting the area where dried blood had been found. Victoria recounted feeling her house was being tipped upside down, and expressed her distress and feeling of violation at strangers rifling through her personal belongings. Despite her discomfort and the disruption, Victoria cooperated with the authorities, even leaving for a previously scheduled dentist appointment while the search was underway. Adding to the restrictions placed upon Victoria following Emile's arrest, the police informed her that she could not apply for a passport for her son Ben. This measure was put in place as part of the ongoing investigation and the concerns for the children's safety, preventing Victoria from taking them out of the country. This restriction further limited Victoria's freedom and highlighted the serious nature of the allegations against her husband and the protective measures being taken by the authorities concerning her children. Almost 2 years after her near-fatal parachute jump, in January 2017, a significant development occurred in the ongoing investigation surrounding Victoria. On a seemingly ordinary morning, Victoria arrived at work, unaware that a pivotal moment in her ordeal was about to unfold. Later that day, one of her colleagues informed her that her boss needed to see her. Upon entering his office, Victoria was met not only by him, but also by two police officers. The officers, with a serious yet gentle demeanor, informed Victoria that a decision had been made by the Crown Prosecution Service. They then delivered the momentous news. Her husband, Victoria Cilliers, was being formally charged with her attempted murder on 2 counts, as well as reckless endangerment of their children's lives. The impact of this revelation was profound for Victoria. She described feeling as though the world had crashed around her, experiencing a wave of disbelief that the man she had married and had children with was now facing such grave accusations. Despite the long months of investigation and the unsettling discoveries about Emil's deceit, the reality of these formal charges brought a fresh wave of shock and pain. In the immediate aftermath of this news, Victoria's thoughts turned to Emil, and she instinctively asked the officers if she could speak to him. However, the officers informed her that this would not be possible. Instead, they conveyed another crucial piece of information. Victoria would be called as a witness in Emil's upcoming trial. This news shifted the focus from the investigation to the impending legal proceedings, leaving Victoria with the stark realization that the nightmare she had been living through was far from over, and a new, challenging chapter was about to begin. The trial of Victoria Cilliers, nearly 2.5 years after Victoria's catastrophic parachute fall, commenced in October 2017. Victoria, having been informed earlier that she would be a witness, found herself outside the courtroom until her testimony. The initial news reports detailed the events of April 5, 2015, at Netheravon, Wiltshire, highlighting the severe malfunction of Victoria's parachute. The absence of 2 vital pieces of equipment, the slinks connecting the harness to the parachute, was identified as the cause of the reserve parachute sending her into a deadly spin. The prosecution laid bare Victoria Cilliers' personal life, revealing his affair with Stephanie Galler, whom he had met on Tinder. The court heard how Cilliers had lied to Galler, claiming Victoria had given birth to a child that was not his due to an affair. In a shocking revelation, the jury also learned of Cilliers' sexual relationship with his ex-wife, Carly Cilliers. This information deeply affected Victoria, especially learning of Carly's involvement while she was heavily pregnant and after the birth of their son, Ben. Further details emerging from the trial included Cilliers' significant debts, amounting to around £22,000 in 2015. The prosecution alleged that Cilliers believed he would receive £120,000 from Victoria's life insurance policy in the event of her death, suggesting a potential financial motive. Testimony from the chief instructor at the parachute center indicated the extreme unlikelihood of the slinks breaking mid-fall, noting the lack of damage to other equipment and the absence of visible signs that the lines had been under load. The instructor considered it most unusual and raised the possibility that the slinks had never been there. The prosecution highlighted Emil's out-of-character keenness for Victoria to jump that day despite poor weather conditions, and the fact that he kept the parachute rig overnight in Victoria's locker against normal procedures. The prosecution argued that Cilliers had taken the heavy and bulky rig into the hangar toilet with April, implying this was when the tampering occurred. A video demonstration showed that sabotaging a parachute in a Netheravon toilet cubicle could take just over 5 minutes. Victoria herself took the stand, facing intense questioning. Her earlier police statements regarding the length of time Emil spent in the hangar toilet became a point of contention, with the defense suggesting inconsistencies. Victoria admitted to having been angry and having expanded on the truth in her initial statements. She acknowledged that she wanted to cast suspicion on him because I had been ridiculed. Victoria, an advanced freefall instructor with around 2,600 jumps, testified that the main parachute had been very tangled, suggesting a possible packing issue. Although main parachute failures were statistically rare, she stated the chances of a reserve parachute also failing were 1 in a million. Regarding her marriage, Victoria admitted it had deteriorated, particularly after November 2014. She also addressed a change in her will in December 2014, leaving her estate to her children due to concerns about Emil's financial management. Victoria also had to confront questions about previous comments she had made to Emil about him trying to kill her after the gas leak incident. After 6 weeks of trial, the jury was sent to deliberate. These deliberations, however, were plagued by accusations of bullying amongst the jurors, with 2 of them eventually discharged after the High Court judge was provided with medical certificates. Following 8 days of deliberation, the jury informed the judge that they would be unable to reach a verdict. As a result of this deadlock, the judge ordered a retrial, leaving Victoria in shock and disbelief, facing further months of uncertainty and public scrutiny, thanks mostly to the media portrayals in the form of sensationalist tabloid coverage. This prompted direct attacks toward her, which included death threats. Not only did she survive a gas intoxication attempt and a 3,000 feet fall provoked by her own husband, she was forced to shield herself from an angry mob that sided with the accused. Weeks after his first trial collapsed due to a hung jury, Victoria Cilliers attempted to have his bail conditions amended. News reports revealed that Cilliers appeared back at Winchester Crown Court seeking permission to spend a month in South Africa with his parents. His defense lawyer argued that his barracks accommodation would be mostly empty over Christmas due to a training unit schedule. Victoria, upon learning of this appeal, was stunned and concerned that allowing him to travel to Cape Town might mean he would not return, especially considering he had been allowed to travel to Europe for a sporting competition prior to the first trial under strict supervision. Ultimately, the judge denied Cilliers' request, and his bail conditions remained unaltered, bringing a slight sense of relief to Victoria, who feared an abscondment would prevent a resolution to the ongoing legal proceedings. The retrial of Victoria Cilliers commenced on April 11, 2018, though Victoria was not due to testify for several weeks. News reports indicated that the prosecution adopted a stronger approach in the retrial. The court heard that Cilliers had arranged to have sex with a prostitute in the weeks leading up to Victoria's near-fatal fall. Testimony also revealed that while Cilliers had not fully completed a reserve parachute packing course, he had sufficient knowledge to potentially tamper with one. During the retrial, Victoria was once again called to the witness stand and faced intense questioning from both the prosecution and the defense. She was questioned extensively about inconsistencies between her initial police statements and her later recollections, particularly regarding the length of time Emil spent in the hangar toilet with her parachute. Victoria admitted that her initial statements were made in anger and that she had elaborated on the truth, wanting to cast suspicion on Emil after learning of his affairs. Despite the defense's attempts to portray her as unreliable, Victoria maintained that while her memory of the exact details of the jump and the preceding events was patchy due to trauma and the passage of time, her fundamental suspicions about Emil remained. The retrial lasted nearly 7 months before the jury was sent to deliberate. Then, finally, Victoria Cilliers was found guilty on 2 counts of attempted murder. A few days following Emil's conviction, Victoria received a text message from Emil's mother in South Africa. The message stated that Emil was devastated by the verdict and that he still loved Victoria. This contact left her in a difficult position, feeling as though she was being pressured to take sides, with some friends wanting her to despise Emil while his mother sought forgiveness. It was after this verdict that Victoria was finally permitted to speak with Emil directly since his first arrest in 2015. Victoria's first direct contact with Emil was a phone call initiated from prison. This occurred after a period of 3 years during which they were unable to speak directly. Victoria described feeling apprehensive and uncertain about what to expect from the conversation, having spent a considerable amount of time imagining how it would unfold. Despite her anticipation of strong emotions, such as crying or shouting, Victoria found herself feeling numb when Emil's familiar voice broke the silence with a simple, "Hi, Vicky." Her response was a brief hello, Emile then inquired, "So, how are you?" To which Victoria replied, "I'm fine." Their conversation remained largely unemotional and factual. Victoria briefly updated Emile on their children. For his part, Emile expressed his confusion about the situation and relayed that his lawyers were preparing him for a significant prison sentence, stating, "I still don't know what's going on, but my lawyers say I need to prepare for a harsh sentence." Victoria's response to this was a simple, non-committal right, indicating her lack of engagement with his predicament. Towards the end of the call, Emile asked Victoria if she would consider visiting him in prison. Victoria responded honestly that she would have to think about it. Reflecting on the conversation afterwards, Victoria felt that she couldn't leave things unresolved and decided that she had too many unanswered questions, leading her to eventually visit him in prison. However, this initial phone call was characterized by a sense of detachment and a lack of strong emotional expression from Victoria. Following Victoria Cilliers' conviction on 2 counts of attempted murder, the final chapter of the legal proceedings unfolded with his sentencing. Victoria, having endured the ordeal of 2 trials and the preceding years of investigation, was present in the courtroom as the judge prepared to deliver the sentence. The atmosphere in the room was thick with anticipation, a stark contrast to the hushed whispers and murmuring lawyers before the judge's arrival. The judge began by summing up the case, his words carrying the weight of the jury's verdict. He described Victoria Cilliers as a danger to the public, characterizing his actions as wicked offending of extreme gravity. Addressing Emile directly, the judge emphasized the extremely serious nature of his crimes, highlighting the 2 planned attempts to murder his wife, carried out in cold blood for selfish purposes, including financial gain. The judge further stated that Cilliers had displayed quite exceptional callousness and a willingness to stop at nothing to satisfy his own desires, noting his utter lack of remorse. The judge acknowledged the miraculous survival of Victoria and the severe physical and psychological harm she had suffered, observing that while she had recovered physically, the psychological scars remained evident. With these damning pronouncements, the judge then delivered the sentence. Victoria Cilliers would serve a minimum of 18 years behind bars. Victoria, conscious of the journalists present and their watchful eyes, deliberately avoided looking at Emile as the sentence was read. The gravity of his actions finally seemed to hit her fully, as she heard every unpleasant detail of his behavior laid bare in its entirety: the lies, the stealing, and his complete disregard for her. After the sentence was delivered, Victoria left the courtroom without glancing at Emile, making her exit through a back door to avoid the waiting press. She met a friend, Helen, for support as she processed the outcome, feeling numb and stunned by the finality of the judgment. The news articles that followed described Emile as dangerous, coercive, and manipulative, a description Victoria could no longer dispute. With the sentencing concluded, Victoria finally had an answer for her daughter, April, about her father's absence, explaining that he had been bad and had gone to prison for what he did to her parachute. In the aftermath of Victoria Cilliers' sentencing for the attempted murder of his wife, Victoria, marking the end of a lengthy and emotionally draining legal battle, a period of profound reflection began for her. With the protracted legal proceedings finally concluded, the intense scrutiny from the media, which had followed the case closely for years, police, who had conducted an extensive investigation, and social services, who had been involved due to concerns for her children's safety, began to subside, allowing Victoria the space to process the years of trauma and uncertainty. This newfound solitude provided an opportunity to contemplate the devastating impact of Emile's actions on her life and the lives of their children, April and Ben. The love she once felt for him had vanished, replaced by a sense of detachment, though the intense emotions surrounding the parachute fall had begun to wane. During this period, Victoria found a crucial source of support in Rob, a padre for the military, who who had offered her confidential counsel through the Army welfare system. She relied on his non-judgmental presence to navigate the complex emotions and experiences she had endured. Many of her friends held strong opinions about the case, making it challenging for Victoria to be entirely open. But with Rob, she felt the freedom to be truly honest about her feelings. His consistent support proved invaluable in helping her maintain balance during a time when she could have easily succumbed to despair. Despite the horrific nature of the events, Victoria found herself considering a return to the sport that had once been a central part of her life: skydiving. The near-fatal jump had effectively removed her from the sport against her will, and she was determined not to let that be her final experience. The idea of another jump began to take root, a way to reclaim a part of herself and perhaps transform the negative associations she now had with skydiving into something positive. This aspiration took concrete form when Victoria engaged in an interview with reporter Sarah Oliver after the trial concluded. In a moment of spontaneity, Victoria challenged Oliver to join her for another skydive, and the reporter immediately agreed. This commitment provided further impetus to Victoria's plan, and she decided to use the jump as an opportunity to raise money for Wiltshire Air Ambulance, the very service that had attended to her after her fall and played a crucial role in her survival. This act of giving back felt like a meaningful way to acknowledge their life-saving efforts. Victoria navigated the practicalities of organizing the charity skydive, starting with a necessary medical assessment from her surgeon, who was pleased with her recovery and cleared her to jump. However, finding a suitable parachute center proved to be more challenging. Her initial approach to Nethervon, where the original incident occurred, felt inappropriate given the media attention the center had already faced. Another local center initially agreed, but later withdrew their offer, citing concerns about negative publicity. Undeterred, Victoria reached out to a friend with connections to another parachute center further afield, who successfully arranged for her jump. Opting for a tandem jump for this symbolic return to the skies, Victoria acknowledged the lingering anxieties and the profound impact of her previous experience. She recognized her potential lack of mental resilience to handle another parachute malfunction and the need for the safety and support of an experienced tandem partner. On the day of the jump, her father and a group of supportive friends were present to cheer her on, along with her children, April and Ben. Despite the familiar environment triggering difficult memories and a wave of panic upon boarding the aircraft, the presence of trusted friends provided reassurance. Strapped to her tandem partner, Nick, Victoria ultimately took the leap. The experience was transformative, allowing her to release some of the pain she had been carrying. The successful jump and controlled descent brought a wave of relief. Through the press coverage of her charity skydive, Victoria raised over £5,000 for Wiltshire Air Ambulance, a tangible demonstration of her resilience and determination to move forward. This act of facing her fears head-on and giving back to those who had helped her marked a significant step in her journey of healing and reclaiming her life.